A man who worked alongside the Liebherr family for years, outside Australia, wrote down something the patriarch said to him once. "It is wonderful to have no shareholders, other than ourselves, to answer to." 30 people pressed like on that. It sits under a video about mining trucks, and it is the single most important sentence in this channel's entire comment section, because it is the only one that explains the mechanism rather than the symptom. Everything else in those comments describes something that happened. A fee, a wait, a policy, a machine that sat for 3 days. That one sentence describes why the machines on the other side of the comparison keep turning out differently. Liebherr is the most mentioned company in that comment section. 18 separate people brought it up unprompted, ahead of Volvo at 15 and Komatsu at 14, and almost nobody is talking about horsepower when they do. So it is worth understanding what that company actually is, structurally, because the structure is the product. Hans Liebherr founded it in 1949, in Germany. Not in Switzerland, which is a correction viewers of this channel have already issued once and were right to. The company moved into earth-moving machinery about 5 years after founding, and the group headquarters sits in Switzerland today. One more correction while it is in front of us, because the comments were right about this too. It is pronounced Liebherr, not Lieber. The company is still owned entirely by the family. The shareholders are the second and third generation descendants of the founder, and there is no outside equity anywhere in the structure. Now, plenty of companies are family-owned, and plenty of them are badly run. Family ownership by itself guarantees nothing, and the industrial world is full of third-generation disasters. What matters is the specific permission that structure creates, and it comes down to one thing. Nobody outside the family gets to ask what the return looks like this quarter. It is worth being precise about who that removes from the room. Not the customers, who still have to be satisfied. Not the banks, who still have to be repaid. What it removes is the group with the shortest attention span and the most leverage, which is an equity market that reprices a company every 90 days on information that has almost nothing to do with whether the next machine will be any good. Think about what that permits an engineer to do. If a Liebherr team wants to spend 6 years on a mining truck drivetrain that will not generate a cent of revenue until year 7, there is no earnings call where that spending has to be defended against a share buyback. There is no analyst writing a note about elevated research expense. There is no incentive plan that vests on a 3-year horizon quietly steering the decision toward the safer product refresh. The project either makes engineering sense to the family, or it does not. And a family that has been building machines for 3 generations has an unusual advantage in judging that question, because the people making the call grew up around the product. They are not generalist capital allocators who arrived from another sector and will leave for a third. That is not a moral advantage, it is a scheduling advantage, and in an industry where a serious new machine platform takes the better part of a decade, a scheduling advantage compounds into a product advantage. The second structural decision matters just as much and gets discussed far less. The group is deliberately decentralized into units small enough to operate independently. Before we go further, if you run the iron, or turn the wrenches on it, subscribe, and turn on the bell. That sounds like an organizational chart detail. On a job site, it is the difference between a decision taken by somebody who knows your name and a decision taken by a policy. A decentralized unit can authorize something unusual because the person authorizing it is close enough to the customer to understand why it is being asked for. A centralized operation cannot, because the person authorizing it is managing exceptions across 40 countries, and exceptions do not scale. That is why the complaint pattern against the big centralized manufacturers is so consistent, and why it always comes back to the same word: policy. Read enough of those comments, and you notice that almost nobody blames the individual. They blame the rule. The technician gets described as decent, apologetic, sometimes visibly embarrassed. It is always the thing he was not permitted to do that ends the relationship. The man who could not get a technician to bring a drive hose was not dealing with a person who did not care. He was dealing with a person who was not permitted to care, which is a different problem and a much harder one to fix from inside. Now here is the part where this has to stay honest, because a video that simply praises a German family firm for 18 minutes is not analysis. Liebherr does not win everything, and private ownership carries real costs. Family firms can be slower to raise capital for a genuinely large bet. They can be opaque, since they publish far less than a listed company must. Succession is a live risk in every generation, and the industrial graveyard is full of family businesses that were superb for 2 generations and then were not. Liebherr also does not have Caterpillar's dealer density in North America, which for a contractor in a remote county is not an abstraction. It is the difference between a part on Tuesday and a part next week. That gap is the single strongest argument for buying yellow in the United States, and it has not gone away. Anybody selling you a story where the European machine wins on every axis is not being straight with you. On a site 4 hours from the nearest city, coverage beats almost everything else on the list. That trade is real, and it goes the other way. Plenty of American operators buy yellow specifically because of it, and they are not being sentimental when they do. So the honest claim is narrower than the internet version, and more useful. The claim is not that private ownership makes better machines. It is that private ownership changes which machines are allowed to be attempted, and over a long enough period that shows up in the catalog. You can see it in what Liebherr actually builds. Very large mining excavators, ultra-class mining trucks, enormous mobile and crawler cranes, offshore cranes. Those are all categories with brutal development costs, small unit volumes, and long payback periods. They are, in other words, exactly the categories a quarterly clock discourages. Look at the shape of those products. An ultra-class mining truck sells in small numbers to a handful of customers, costs an enormous amount to develop, and takes years to qualify in the field before a mine will run a fleet of them. There is no version of that program that looks attractive on a 3-year view. Meanwhile, the categories with short paybacks and high volumes, the compact machines, are exactly where Caterpillar is currently growing. Its compact track loader sales rose 18.8% year over year on the new 255 and 265 models. That is not a coincidence, and it is not a failure. It is a company allocating capital rationally, given the clock it is measured on. This is the part most videos on this subject get wrong, and it is worth saying clearly. Caterpillar is not being run by idiots. It is being run by people responding correctly to the incentives placed in front of them. If you want different decisions, you have to change the incentives, and no amount of complaining in a comment section does that. There is one more piece of evidence that this is structural rather than national, and it is the reason this story is not really about Germany at all. Look at the other companies gaining ground. Komatsu, inside a Japanese corporate structure with long horizons and cross-holdings. Kubota, a company that started making cast-iron water pipe in 1890 and entered American compact equipment slowly across decades. Ponsse, founded by a Finnish forestry contractor who could not buy the machine he wanted, so he built it, still building them in the same part of the country. Kubota is the most instructive of those, because it is the least romantic. There is no founding legend about a visionary, and no family patriarch quote. There is just a company that entered a market slowly, kept entering it through several cycles when the returns were unremarkable, and is now the leading seller of the highest volume machine in American construction at 27.1% of that category. Patience does not have to be inspiring to work. 4 different countries, 4 different ownership arrangements, 1 shared property, which is that none of them has to explain a 7-year program to somebody who will have moved job before it finishes. That last clause is the quiet one. A chief executive with a 4-year tenure and a 3-year incentive plan is being asked to fund something that pays out after he is gone, to the benefit of a successor who will get the credit. The structure does not merely fail to reward that decision. It actively punishes it. A viewer put the whole thesis in 1 sentence under a mining truck video, and he did it better than any analyst has. Liebherr is, and was, an engineering company, understanding the value of research and development. Caterpillar was an engineering company that turned into a bank. It is worth noticing where that comment appeared, not in a business publication, not in an analyst note, but underneath a video about mining trucks, written by somebody who was probably watching it on a phone. The people closest to the machines routinely produce better structural analysis of this industry than the people paid to produce it, because they are the ones who experience the consequences of the structure, rather than modeling them. That is harsh, and it is not entirely fair to the thousands of good engineers still at Caterpillar. But he is not describing their ability. He is describing what they are permitted to spend a decade on. Subscribe if you want more of these. This channel covers the real story behind the machines, the part the dealer never puts in the brochure. So if you are trying to work out which manufacturers will still be making machines you want in 15 years, the specification sheet is close to useless for that question. Look at the ownership page instead. Find out who the company answers to and how often they have to answer. A firm that reports to a family once a year, and a firm that reports to a market every 90 days, will make different decisions about the same engineering problem, every time, in the same direction. The Liebherr patriarch was not boasting when he said that to a visitor. He was describing the constraint he does not have, and every operator who has ever waited on a part already knows exactly which of his suppliers is working under it.